it.
Guys, and welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast, Unresolved Textual Tension. It's me, your host, Maria, and today with me I have my handsome bitches, Katie and William.
And the book we're doing today is Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. And this is going to be an interesting book to talk about because this was a Patreon. Was this? Yes, no, this was a Patreon one. So this is yet another in our example of democracy makes bad decisions sometimes. Maria, what did you think of this book?
The first, I want to say, third of the book, or like the very beginning, I was like, "Ooh, this is a cool setup." The prose is a little intense. We're writing this from the point of view of angst teenagers, and the book is like, I'm gonna bring very descriptive, intense prose to angsty teenagers, but the setup was really cool and interesting, and there was like, I'm going to talk about how this book had an excellent setup. Like, it just drops you in really well. And then as the book went on, there's parts where it got like a little too much for me. Very lost structurally. I think we're all going to have some stuff to say about the structure.
Bad. It became really bad.
This book just makes some decisions that made me so angry. I rage quit last night with 50 minutes left at 1.7 speed because I could not with the decision or the way this one character was like, I just wanted to punch the main character in the face very hard.
It wasn't interesting. It was dark and sad and dreary for dark and sad and dreary's sake, and not as a utilization to convey a certain message.
Masturbatory.
Yeah, I would agree with William on this. It is very masturbatory.
This book, Maria's right. It starts really strong. I was like, oh shit, this is good. This author is talented. And then the book just kind of gets worse and worse, and you're like, oh my god, this is... There's a lack of plot. This is a fanfic book. This is fanfic the author wrote of their own characters. And it's funny because halfway through the book, I said to Maria, this is for sure written by a woman, right? Even though C.G. Drews sounds like a man. And I went and looked it up. And thankfully, before we started this, I saw that the author is actually non-binary. So we will try to use they, them pronouns throughout, but we may mess up at times. And the reason I thought it was a female author is because... and the author is AFAB, is because this feels like so many fanfics of the yaoi, I forget how it's pronounced, soft boy tragedy masturbation genre.
Okay, so I feel like I am drowning in a soup this entire book. And this soup is just made of wishful hinges and glittering galaxies of stardust, and like it's too much. When Will says masturbatory, at least my approach to it is that it's so inundated with almost a grotesque amount of the same vibe description. Like, you can tell that the author's digging a hole and digging deep, no pun intended, digging deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and just like like the sand spider, you know, like it's like like that's what they're doing in this book. It's because this, I mean, I think you guys will both agree. This is very much up my alley in many ways. And yes. It's just, yes. And it's just, it's so funny at the beginning. I was like, is this like a Teen Wolf fan fiction made into like and then I don't know why I keep going with Teen Wolf. I think it's just because that's what I ended on. And I'm just like looking for the characters. I'm like, wait, there's a tree. There's also a tree in Teen Wolf. And
Jesus Christ.
No, because I've read so many fanfics in that world set that sounds just like this, because whoever's writing it wants to create this dark, magical, powerful thing. But the thing is when you keep slapping your audience over the head with it again and again and again, it loses its like value.
I'm going to say something up front, which is, if the prose and intensity of the narration does not wear on you, you will probably have a better experience. And for me, that side of things was a little less affecting for me than some of the plot decisions. So for instance, I know some of our readers actually quite liked the prose and the vibe that was created and the aesthetique the book got. And I'm really interested, especially because I just realized that Lindbergh has not finished this and so hasn't gotten to the part that made me rage quit. And so I'm really interested to seeing. I'll talk about it in a second. I have a problem.
We should start with the premise too.
Yes,
But
let's start with the premise, and then I will discuss just the trope that I hate that this book does that drives me up a wall.
Which one? There's a lot.
I'll get there. But the premise of this book is it is set at a boarding school for very rich kids, like a prestige. Think walnut wood, oak, dark banisters, crown molding with like a little bit of a dark academia vibe. Kids in like their ties and blazers as their school uniforms, and everybody's come from like money of some kind. And the book starts with our main character, Andrew, who is a twin, and he's very close with his sister, Dove. And something happened at the end of last year that affected him and caused him to shove his hand through a mirror because he has a lot of scars. And him, Dove, and his their best friend, Thomas. Dove and Thomas had a bit of a falling out. Dove has not told Andrew what this is about, has been given everyone kind of the cold shoulder, and he hasn't heard from Thomas all summer. And so the book kind of starts with a bit of the mystery of what happened last year, because you don't know. And then when he finally sees Thomas, Thomas is super stressed. Thomas's parents are missing, and people are asking Thomas questions about, where were you the night your parents went missing, and a ton of their blood is all over your home. And you're like, oh my God, what's happening with Thomas? And then you find out that Thomas is fighting monsters that have appeared in the forest at night that specifically take the form of the monsters that Thomas has drawn, inspired by Andrew's stories. And these two boys have to go against the darkness and fight together.
For Maria's sake, everyone remember that is the sequence of how these of where Thomas's drawings are drawn inspiration from, because everyone else in this book will forget.
Yes. So a problem I have is when sometimes an author will let the reader know something before a character does, as a little taste, and then you're waiting like, oh, I wonder when the character will figure out. But at a certain point, it gets real annoying, especially because there's two things our main character Andrew doesn't know that he should. One is excusable because of trauma and the way people process trauma, and specifically repression. That one I'm okay with, and we'll talk about that. The second one, it drove me up. There's only so many times you can have him be like, but did we destroy all of your drawings? You have to still be drawing. And it makes it so you don't respect the intelligence of the characters. You want to throttle the author, because at a certain point, and I'm going to talk about this when we get there, what is the point? What is the point of this decision? What does it bring to the narrative that having...
Oh, I thought you meant the book.
That having the character not get it a little bit sooner in a way that would make sense wouldn't have done. And I'm going to argue nothing. There is no point. It is garbage, and I hate it.
I would like to bring up a couple of things just so that way hopefully I don't forget them later. Not like... just big ideas that I felt like were touch uponable, which are quite a lot. One, what a flat note on the father-son relationship that was very pathetically attempted to be explored for 5 seconds and then completely thrown in the garbage chute, which could have been very powerful considering what could have been done between him and his father. It would have been so interesting. Especially the reason I bring it up is because the author did. And then just never continued on that line. That's
why I was like, yeah, what is the point of this book? So Lindbergh in the comments has mentioned that up to the point where they're pretty happy with it, and she's about halfway through. And that's kind of the thing about this book, is it just keeps compounding by not being about anything new. the book gets worse as time goes on because it's just the same thing over and over and over again. And none of this stuff ever goes anywhere. I swear to God, if I have to hear about how Thomas has curly hair or freckles one more goddamn time.
A thing we should mention really quick is that Andrew and Thomas are into each other. Andrew is asexual, but is very much in love with, and that's something he's struggling with as part of who he is. There's a lot of things Andrew's struggling with. Andrew is depressed, sad boy, okay? And then Thomas is depressed, angry boy.
Pause. Andrew is not depressed, sad boy. Andrew, it's so beyond that. Andrew is, you are so mentally ill. This is like the portrayal, I would say very accurate. However, that being said, for a storytelling mechanism, there is no, as you both have already just stated, there's no like minor subplots that resolve certain aspects of the story to either to build, or one giant one that goes into a building of self for him. It's because that would have, not that I'm saying that it should have a happy ending. It doesn't have to have a happy ending, but it feels really hollow in his character. He feels like again, porn, like not literally porn, but like within himself, he is so saturated in just the vibe, but not the story of whatever is happening with that character.
This book is such tragedy, soft boy. I have not hated. Okay. Let me go back for a second here. One of the things I hate most in life is books that are wish fulfillment, masturbatory, and for some reason the author published it. It's like fanfic of their own characters. This book, like we were saying, is fanfic, and this is fanfic in the genre of look at these absolutely gorgeous boys and how sad and soulful and intense they are. That's why I was kind of like, this author must have come from a fanfic background. There is a fetishization of gay men that happens in fanfic communities that borders on gross at a certain point, and this book takes that and makes it and it is afloat in it. Not the right word.
In response to that, the thing is like there is nothing wrong with telling a story. You can tell a successful story with those elements to some degree, but I feel like this one doesn't. This story is not able to take that like molten metal, that to make into a shape of some sort. Unfortunately, the blade on this one will not cut. The blade on this one will not cut. It cannot kill. So it feels while I just want to clarify, I feel, and I think Will might agree, that those elements could be skillfully wielded, but in the case of this, it feels overzealous.
I think there is a case to be made that you can write angst and gay people fine and tell very good and smart stories. But what I'm talking about is a fetishization of soft boyness that this book indulges in. Like at a certain point, I was like, ma'am, these kids are teenagers. Please stop describing this boy's body as much as you are. This book, the primary bond between Andrew and Thomas is how incredibly gorgeous Andrew finds Thomas and will describe in detail this teenage boy's body.
I want to highlight a comment, and then I'm going to bring an example of, I'm going to bring in an author that I bring in way too much, but she has a book where she does something similar, so I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, Lindbergh says, some of the repetitions, like the curly hair and, ooh, was he naked? They were so close, his skin was soft, and so on, strikes me as an author who really wants to convey depth of emotion but doesn't trust the reader to feel it, so they overdo it and it becomes a sticky, overwrought fantasy that can be off-putting. And that's kind of what it is, because it's like the author is like to convey that these boys are so into each other that it becomes almost too much. And so
that it's moving.
There's a book series that I immediately associated this with because Thomas reminded me of the better done version of this character in this other book series, and it is Raven Boys by Naomi Novik.
Not Naomi Novik, Maggie Stiefvater, but yes.
Oh yeah, you're right, Maggie Stiefvater, who we mention all the time. She did the Scorpio races, and I have read all of the Raven Cycle, which was a really good book. But Maggie Stiefvater has this way of writing things that you should find annoying, but she does banter dialogue and character development so well. And so the character that oh my god, I'm blanking on his name. The cut glass gravelly boy. It's like he's sharp edges. He has that gravelly voice. He's the audiobook author really hit it out of the park with his give me one sec.
Yeah, I agree with Maria, having read the first one, and I didn't love the first one, but like Maggie Stiefvater can write this kind of a character so much better. She is much better at the actual personality conflicts. That's part of the thing, is we keep getting told that they have this Andrew and Thomas have this incredible intensity between them, but that's only ever explained in a physical way. It's never like their personality.
Yeah, it's never really shown in a
There's no real personality to either of these characters besides Andrew just being like, I have social anxiety. I also have social anxiety, so I get to make them.
You know what's funny is that I got the boys mixed up with each other.
Ronan Lynch. Sorry.
The two boys are basically almost the same character, to the point where I genuinely kept getting their names and their identities mixed up with each other up until about halfway through the book. Because what is Tom? First of all, I feel like the Australian boy should be named Thomas. I don't know why. And the other guy should be named Andrew. I don't know why. I just feels like he's more of an Andrew and he's more of a Thomas. I just feel like Andrew is like a name, like Andrew, the American, and Thomas, the Australian.
Can we agree the narrator should have been someone who can do an Australian accent?
Oh God, yeah, that was.
Yes, that would have
so
been
bad
great.
at it.
Okay, so back to there's a character in the Raven Cycle who becomes sad boy with problems, Adam Parrish, and then we have Ronan Lynch, who's basically a bundle of cut glass with a gravelly voice, who's got a lot of problems and anger, and those two end up together, which is perfection. You find out Adam's bi. Ronan has only ever really been into men. You don't realize that until they kiss for the first time, and you're like, hot fucking damn. But Stiefvater is able to kind of organically have the two bond and then like spring it on you, and it just fucking works. And so like, and I love them. The minute that happened, I was like, oh, I ship this so hard. And Ronan being like,
what works about that though is that you learn to love the character, so it becomes a true depth of emotion of relationship, kind of like what Lindbergh was saying with the characters themselves. Whereas I almost feel like what's it called, I don't want to say spectator, a purveyor, a voyeur. Thank you. I feel like a voyeur in this novel. And then also it's almost again, it's just a whole bunch of sticky sweet stuff back to back to the point where it feels cloying. I can't tell you how many times, and we should probably get into the plot, I suppose. But I can't tell you how many times it is repeated, just like about the rot, about the mud of the forest, about the gross. And I'm just like, it just becomes boring.
Yes. So I will say really quick, I found Thomas and Andrew very distinct. Now, I as far as they didn't confuse me, I didn't feel like they were the same personality or archetype. I wanted more from both of them in certain senses, because one of the moments where Andrew kind of shined for me as a character was when he was with other characters who weren't Thomas. Like, there's a couple of scenes where he interacts with these two girls, and like you get to see him have a normal conversation. And one of the things that this book doesn't get is how you need the breaks from the really intense moments to kind of, number one, bring out the intensity of those moments, but number two, to ground the characters, make them feel real, make them feel like there is more happening in the story, that it just adds a layer to it. And this, for me, those tiny moments where Andrew got to interact with people who weren't Thomas, and also, could the two of them never just have a normal conversation or a normal interaction? Like, one of my favorite interactions that they had that I thought was actually well done was Andrew is not eating, and there's a point where he won't eat stuff. I know. There's a point where he won't eat stuff unless Thomas has bitten into it first, because he accidentally bit into a sandwich that had a bunch of worms in it. And there's a point where they're just sitting and they're both kind of like fucking around doing other things, and like Thomas bites an Oreo, hands it back to Andrew. And there's this sense of like, there's a weird thing, but we're making a normal routine out of it. And they're also like not angsting and like, oh my god, the world's terrible, but you're my one light that I have at the end of the tunnel. But and so in a moment, it just really worked. It's one of the best moments for those two characters. And you see like Thomas is indulging Andrew, but he also wants him to eat, and it just feels like this is a thing people do for each other. And I loved it. It worked, and we don't get enough of those moments.
Just like the comment I made about the father subplot, my second point that I was going to make after that was the subplot about his eating. Now, there's much that could be said about the exploration of the origins of his lack of appetite and why it's developed so horribly. But I can't help but become enraged by the lack of, like, coming together of the idea that he is an empty inside thing, and so he has nothing. The message, the theme is so murky. I don't understand it. Like, the forest is growing inside him, so he should, so he feels full, so he can't eat. But that doesn't really, come clear through, because the seed behind his ear, was it growing? What's the seed represent? What is it growing the forest within him?
He was not eating from before that, and the vibe I got was that this was something he had struggled with in the past, but we never revisited. Yes. So there's a lot of ways to put this book in perspective. This book is trying to be a way to deal with grief, and it's two things. It is a codependent relationship between two people and an attempt of how to deal with grief. And unfortunately, I don't think it does either as well as it could. And just working within the confines of what the story is going to do, I'm going to give a couple ways I think it could have hit that note a little bit more. Because basically, and I'm just going to rip a Band-Aid off really quick. Spoilers. Okay, let me just say something really quick. If you are at all would like to read this book, if you are interested, stop now.
Don't read it.
I am going to we're going to spoil everything. And this is one of those books where there are certain things that you discover as a reader and you're going to go, ho, ho, ho. Yeah, and I think I guessed one of them very, very, very quickly. But it also there gets to a point where the reader knows and the character doesn't. But Dove is dead. The main character stops. Don't listen anymore. The main character's twin sister is dead, and this book is supposed to be how he is repressing.
It was so obvious.
Repressing that knowledge. He is hallucinating her around campus, but she never interacts with anyone else. And there was a point, because the book at the start sells it to you as they're a trifecta. They are three best friends. They spend all their time together. Thomas doesn't like anyone, but he loves these two people. And then you never see Dove. She never interacts with the two of them. And there's a point where Will is like, there should be more Dove. And I'm like, absolutely. She sounds like a hot type A, a little bitchy person. Will, you sound like, she sounds like she's made for you. And then I was like, but what if she's dead?
No. Okay. So I didn't voice that. I asked Will that later on. But when we get to the point where they're in the library and she's like, and he's like, I've been texting you or whatever, right? I'm thinking to myself, okay, so this built it up really nicely in the beginning about her being really pissed off, so you're not seeing him. And then they're also in different gender dorms, so it would make sense that he wouldn't see her a lot, but he should see her. That the problem is I think it should have been kept more of a secret for longer, because you, again, like Maria said, you know what it is, but the character doesn't. And so it takes away the shock a little bit after a while. It's not very fun at a lot of points. It's just frustrating. And what would have been nice is if she did show up a lot more in classes, almost I'm thinking of a movie, and I can't think because there's so many like these, but I'm thinking of some kind of vaguely mature 90s, early 2000s movie where somebody doesn't know somebody's dead and they keep like just barely like interacting with the world, so that way it's the facade of them actually belonging to it is there. I felt like that should have been done way more, and then like I'm sure we can discuss it at the right point, reveal a little bit more, and then it would be fun for the reader to know. But
yes, and here's the thing: I want to make a point that the twist of Dove being dead I don't think is a bad one. I think it is a good in the sense that it makes sense that Andrew would repress this trauma. That is not the twist I have a problem with. It completely makes sense that he would. My point is, how we dealt with Dove should have been a little bit different to make the reader more invested in his guilt, because unfortunately Dove being dead and like that stuff takes a huge as far as his grief, the repressed potential guilt, the repressed anything, takes a huge backstep to his feeling about Thomas and the actual like goings on that is happening now. And I think the book needed to tie those things in way more in a way that you felt his like there's only 2 moments where I really was like, oh shit, he needs Dove, like, and I needed that way more. I needed to be sad at the end when he realized Dove was dead, and the book doesn't make you sad that Dove is dead. That's the problem. I never cry for Andrew realizing his sister's dead.
I think the book holds on to the twist too long. I think it should have been earlier, and it also doesn't help that it makes the book, even knowing it, the beginning of the book feels weird because you're like, she's not well characterized. So even retroactively, it doesn't really make that part feel less weird. I think the problem though is that this book has nothing to say about grief. Its main point is, isn't Thomas hot? And isn't he sad? And doesn't Andrew love him so much? Oh my God, they're so sad.
I think a lot of this could have been solved. Like if we're going to talk structure and we're going to talk what would mechanically be done, I've already mentioned some of it, but I feel the truly a kernel of what could be an instant, easy boost to the interest of this story is making the monsters actually have some type of sentience, and then making like a murder mystery. Make it into Agatha Christie. Like make it. It's already dark academia. Make it into a murder mystery where they have to figure out this stuff. Why? I don't feel like Andrew should know. Not Andrew. I don't feel like Thomas should know from the Get Out that there are monsters. That it should be a discovery they have together or something like that. Why do his parents have to die at the beginning? Is it to give you the kernel of truth that it doesn't have anything to do with him because he didn't draw that and Andrew wrote about it? Because that never really comes center front where that matters enough. So it's not like a reveal of really any sort. So it's just a dumb breadcrumb. No, I'm so sorry, author. It is just a breadcrumb that is just sitting on the floor and it's not leading me anywhere. And I just feel like, again, conclusion, instant boost to success is add more plot to the monsters and don't just make them representation of grief, because they do physically exist and kill people.
I think you just need more Dove. I think he should have had way more interactions with the hallucination of Dove. So we got her personality more, like, and where she's genuinely trying to bond with her brother, but also because what you're also going to find out is that the hallucination of Dove that he sees is a specific tree in the forest that soaked in her blood when she died and has now been walking around as a and it would have. But what I would have liked is if there was Dove's spirit and then the tree hallucination of Dove, and that there was the kind Dove that was actually working with him and trying to get him. Like, I would have loved if there was a version of Dove that was like trying to help him. You know, like in Mexican Gothic, there was that one character, Ruth, that kept talking to her and being like, "Open your eyes." I would have liked if there was like weird tree Dove who was possessed by who wasn't actually Dove but was weird sentient tree taking on her thing.
I honestly think multiple parts of her personality should have been split between different trees.
Yes, and that there was the kind one, the one that cared about her brother, where you got that intimacy, and then there was the vindictive one.
Two things already you guys both said, and I got two different ideas for it. Maria's first, right? Okay, Andrew writes a short story, and it's very important in the story, about two dryads that are in love, and they're both boys, and it's the first boy-boy story that he's ever written. And they fall in love with each other, and they curl around each other because they're dryads, would tree people. And then a axeman comes and hacks them in two, so they're apart, right? What a wonderful mirroring for multiple things. Number one, Dove, if we did take your idea of Dove having the monster that fed on her versus her that still is a remnant within, and having the two of them curled around each other, and he has to be the woodcutter, and it has nothing to do with him and Thomas, and it has to do with him and his twin that are curled around each other, and then you
And
hack
having
them
to
apart.
separate.
Yes, exactly. Or if you even wanted to do the multiple tree thing, that still connects with one of his stories where the trees are his sisters, and they give him a crown, and later on he has to go out and kill his sisters. Like, that any of that could have come together in a really beautiful like symphony of theme.
Yes, and all of it would have required way more Dove. Okay, so I'm getting into the plot really quick because we're going into too much detail, and this is how you know we have a lot of feelings about this. Okay, so Andrew returns to school. He hasn't talked to his best friend, who he's in love with, all summer because his phone broke because Thomas's parents are kind of abusive, but in a way where like Andrew's.
Another thing that never comes up for any reason, so why have it?
And also, there's never a point where Andrew, like, Thomas is like, yes, my parents do bad things, but they also can be sometimes good. Like, there's no nuance to it, or, like, Andrew has no sense of nuance to the situation, and, like, or the fact that, like, you can't just be like, your parents are abusers, to someone who is still in the process of working their way through their feelings. Like, if you just, like, say the thing, the person, like, puts up defenses and doesn't, like, and there's never a point where Andrew's like, wow, I have been handling this wrong. But anyway, and so he hasn't talked to his best friend. His sister has been icing his dad out all summer. They evidently got into a fight and they're not talking. And when they get to school, his sister just runs out of the car and goes into the school, and his dad's like, are you okay? You know, are you sure you want to come back to this school? We could have put you in a different school. And he's like, no, Dad, I'm fine. Everything I love is here. And
spoiler alert, everything that he loves is Thomas. That's the other thing we
Yes.
get from this intro, is how much he adores Thomas, and Thomas is his whole heart. But I'm making fun of it, but I actually think, again, this is actually a pretty good scene. It catches you up very quickly. You're like, okay, this is their dynamic. These are the characters. I'm ready. Let's jump in.
And there's a point where he can't find Thomas, and like Thomas should be there waiting for him to get there. And he's like, oh no, what if something's happened? What if he's angry with me? Like, what if, the fight he had with Dove at the end of the year has affected us? And he's like really nervous, and he ends up finding Thomas, and Thomas looks very, rough. He's bedraggled. And Thomas, generally, what we're told about Thomas is he's just like a bag of angry cats. Like that's how he's sold to you.
No. He's a beautiful artist when he's not in his school clothes. And when he is in his school clothes, he looks so disreputable. He has curly, devil curled hair and freckles. You guys need to understand the level of... This book would be an hour shorter if it didn't have descriptions of Thomas.
It goes really hard, and you immediately get that Andrew's feelings are very complicated because he literally wrote a short story that he gave to Thomas at the end of the year that was about a boy cutting his heart out and giving it to another boy, and you're like, and he's like, I hope Thomas understood what I was trying to tell him, but at the same time I don't, because God forbid he acknowledges, we acknowledge anything.
Because that's the other big part of Angie that I don't think we've mentioned, but is actually just a massive part of the book, which is, oh no, we did mention this. Andrew is asexual. Yeah. He seems to think that also encompasses being aromantic, but he's very clearly in love with Thomas. And like, so it's like a little bit of a weird
I think
thing.
The problem is he has a lot of guilt. So as much as he loves Thomas, he knows that, you know, like Thomas isn't asexual, and he's not the kind of asexual who could have sex, because it's a spectrum, and there's different ways.
It's not clearly defined that that's a big promotion of the issue there, the miscommunication between what he expects Thomas to want from him versus what he truly is okay with. But also, can I just note also another thing about the whole dove thing and the tree and the two-spirit thing? There's this great detail. I feel like the author just like forgot to do it, because there's so many things here. Because remember
you mean
how,
the detail of Dove's boots had dirt and mud on them?
Oh, well, that too. Oh my, oh God, that's a whole other thing. Hold on a second. Come back to that in a moment. But some other time. No, I'm talking about how it's specifically stated at the beginning of the story. Even though it doesn't really matter, it's because it's not revealed in a way that it would matter, that Dove doesn't like the color red when she edits her brother's work. It's because she says red is like, it makes you feel crappy, basically. When you see, oh, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. So instead she uses...
Little does she know that the red one goes fastest.
What?
Don't listen to him.
go ahead.
It's a Warhammer joke.
I like that you know. Anyway, no. She doesn't like using red, so she uses purple. Well, later on, like when it really slaps you over the head that she's dead, where they meet up together in the library, and she hands back this short story that Maria was talking about, edited, but in red. I'm like, as soon as you said that, I was like, as soon as you were like mentioning the short story, I was like, oh my God, wait a second, I forgot. That's a clue that's not even she thinks the readers are too dumb to pick up on that, so she feeds it to them. And then also, but what a great combination of the dual personality. Anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have to intervene here because there's some slander going on in the comments. Lindbergh says, it's not that bad, Will. You're just icked out by dudes. My description of talking about Comus. Ben says, to be honest, I got the sense that this book was I never got the sense that this book was thirsty for Thomas. I just thought the author was over-describing his physical appearance to signal that this is important. And then Lindbergh says, if Thomas was a woman, Will would think the descriptions were fine. We just don't usually get male characters described that way in prose. Here's the thing. So in a less joking sense than I normally put on, the problem is I'm conflating two things. I feel uncomfortable with how over fetishized his descriptions are in the book. I don't actually think the author is thirsty for him. That's just kind of like a funny thing. But the problem is that his physicality and his beauty are used as a shorthand for their closeness and for Andrew's attraction to him, and that's lazy. It's really, really lazy. And the other thing is, Lindbergh, you haven't gotten to the worst part of this book. You're still in the first half. Yeah. This gets worse in the second half of the book significantly than in the first half.
It's almost like I'm not going to say that because I'm not going to presume to know the writing process they went through. But again, like it feels like a sinking boat halfway through. And also, yeah, like Maria said, the Oreo scene, beautiful, excellent.
Beautiful.
I have a thick book that I won't subject everyone to looking at because it's so girthy. But it's an entire physical fan fiction of Loki and Tony Stark.
Frost Iron, baby.
Look, it's a great pairing. Like, just character-wise. I loved the heterosexual ones, too. It's great. I love it when Tony Stark was female.
Nope.
Love it.
Fighting words.
It doesn't matter. The point is that that book has the same problem, but the only reason it has the same problem is because it's like over 1 million words. So of course it's going to have the same problem at some point. But that author was able to make me feel genuine like closeness purely by interesting situational things or mini plot lines with situations that help characterize rather than tell.
Lindbergh says, but we are still in the early stages of the plot recap, and in the beginning it's not really that remarkable. And I will say it wasn't that bad in the beginning because me, I got to a point where I was like, oh, this author likes this pairing so much. And like, I get it. I have characters I have written that or that I like have created, and in my head I'm like, damn, I love them together. And you have to kind of like let the reader always has to be either on board or like a step ahead of the author as far as plotting a romance. And this book, like at that halfway point, just goes down hard. Like it just jumps over. But continuing with the plot recap, because we gotta get we got to get there. So he sees Thomas. Thomas has a little bit of blood on his sleeve. He's extra disheveled because Thomas is normally disheveled. Again, he especially in the beginning is described as like a bag of angry cats. Like, just if somebody says something, he's gonna come out swinging. Again, like Ronan Lynch, but less cool. And he's like, oh, like there's a bit of awkwardness there, and then he hugs Thomas, and then Thomas kind of like seems to be a bit better about it. And then there's this dumb guy, like there's a like jock shitty guy.
It made me feel, his name is Bryce, first of all.
Bryce
and second
Kane.
of all, yes, and second of all, he is so ridiculously maniacal. Like, what a mustache twirling villain. And also, he's not even an interesting mustache twirling villain.
Also, I don't know about like rich people schools, but like especially when we're told that the principal seems to
Zero
genuinely
tolerance.
care about, but also like the principal who out the gate is shown to be defensive of her students, despite having lots of issues with Thomas, is immediately like in his corner in certain points, that this entire faculty is just completely unwilling to acknowledge the bullying of this one rich kid. Anyway, so Bryce Kane is like a dick, and he comes out the gate being dickish, and then Thomas is like, let's go, Andrew, let's go somewhere else. And the two go, and they're having like problems. Thomas isn't drawing. Him and Andrew get into a fight early on, and I can't really remember what the fight's about, but basically for 2 weeks, Thomas does, oh, that's what it is. First day of school, they're going to class, and then the principal is like, Mr. Thomas, I need to speak to you. And everybody's like, oh my God, already? First day of school? And we haven't even gotten to class.
And then they jump to later as well. He murdered his parents. That's how bad of a bad boy he is. It's like,
Andrew's like, what did you do, buddy? Like, we haven't even gotten to class. And Thomas is like, I didn't do anything. And then he also says to Andrew, come with me. And the principal is like, no. Andrew, Mr. Perot, you go to class. But Andrew, because Thomas told him to, he sneaks up and he listens outside the door, and there's two cops who are questioning Thomas about the disappearance of his parents and the fact that their home is covered in a lot of blood. And they were like, when did you get to school? And he was like, early morning. And they were like, when did you leave home? And he was like, last night. And they were like, oh, you couldn't have left your home and then gone to school later. Like,
wait a second.
Which is just like,
oh my God.
Teenagers can leave in the middle of the night and then go to school in the morning. Like, he could have been knocking around a park. Like, I don't understand why they were like, Zacchaeus, we've caught you.
No, but you just unearthed another problem. There is a baby Minnie, like, the way it is written, it makes it seem that these police officers will be involved in the future based off of the way they discuss Thomas and the way Andrew like connects with their like discussion. It very obviously points a spotlight at them the way it is, and then nothing happens.
And so basically at one point, and the principal immediately is like, excuse me, you said you were asking my students some questions. Are you interrogating him?
Should we get him a lawyer? I love that shit.
Do we need to get him a lawyer? And I'm immediately like, oh, principal, despite the fact that you've had tons of issues with Thomas his entire academic career, you are immediately like, you coming for one of my chillins, I'm a come for you. And I was like, ooh, great. I love this. I like when faculty are not just terrible, evil things, like, or people, but have like dimension to them where they can be the person that has reprimanded you your whole life, but they're also someone who is going to defend you. Anyway, the police officers leave, and as they leave, because Andrew was outside listening, he hears the one say, he definitely did it. He's lying. I know that guy did it. And he's like, holy shit. And he's like, Thomas, what the fuck happened? When he comes out, and Thomas is like, I don't want to talk about it, but I do need to talk to you about something later. And then in their room later, he's like, did you, like, what is happening? And he's like, so my parents are missing and they think I killed them. I didn't do it, but I was there and it was a lot. And he was like, okay, well, why are you lying? Like, you're not telling me something. And then at one point, Andrew decides to say, but if you did it, like, I wouldn't blame you. Like, I wouldn't think less of you. Like, your parents were neglectful abusers. Like, fuck them. And he doesn't say all of that, but he basically says, I wouldn't blame you, or I wouldn't love you less, or Like, I wouldn't care if you did.
And of course, Thomas flies into a fury of, oh my gosh, I can't believe you would even indicate that you would think that I would kill them.
I did that.
And farewell.
And for 2 weeks, they don't interact. Thomas isn't sleeping in the dorm at night. They're not seeing each other at meals. They're not interacting. Andrew, and so at this point, his sister, Andrew's sister, is not interacting with him because she's pissed off at Thomas. And there's literally a scene earlier on where he's like, why don't you go talk to Thomas and figure out your issue? And she's like, fine, I'll go follow him. And you think they must have had an interaction because at this stage, you don't know. Like, you, the reader, haven't been like, ho, ho, ho. And so, and then there's a point where Bryce Kane is being, or no, Andrew needs to sit in the cafeteria, and he's first day back getting dinner, and he doesn't have, Dove has gone off to chase Thomas. Thomas isn't talking to him, and this girl, Lana, who was Dove's best friend, but also her biggest academic rival, calls him over and lets him sit with her, and they have a conversation, and like, Lana is very intense. She's got like, and honestly, some of the side characters are the best characters because like they've got a personality.
Great. Chloe's
Chloe
awesome.
and Lana, and basically Lana is a person who struggles, like who seems very sharp even when she's trying to be kind and doing kind things, but can come off as very gruff. And she's like, you can always sit with me if you need a place to sit. Like, we're good. Maybe you should join GSA. And he's like, which is Gay Straight Alliance. And he's like, why would you even say that? I don't need that. But he goes off to try, again, 2 weeks go by. He doesn't interact with Thomas. And then eventually he follows Thomas into, because he keeps seeing mud on Thomas's shoes and knows that he's been going out into the forest, which has this year a fence has been put up around it. And previous years there hadn't been a fence, and they used to go on like hiking day trips with teachers into the forest, but now no more fence. No one, and if you were found in the forest, you will be immediately expelled from the school. And so he realizes Thomas is going in, and then he also realizes that he sees Dove and sees her feet are muddy, and there's dirt clinging to her, so he thinks the two of them have been going off into the forest together.
It's never actually made clear how he's having this much of a psychotic break. Like, that's the thing, is like he's blocking out his sister's death, and it's like, okay, but you're not having a psychotic break. You're not on medication for this. Like, it's kind of odd that the book doesn't explain quite how he got to this point.
Also, did the oak tree go to Australia with him? Because there's a point where the vision... Yeah, no, these are the questions we must ask. There's a point where at the end, the vision of Dove turns into the oak tree. And you realize that it's been the oak tree. It's not an oak tree. It's a different type of tree, but I forgot what kind of tree it is. But it has been the tree all along that has been romping around and interacting with him, and is part of the reasons why Dove is angrier and not as nice as she normally is. And this is why I thought there should have been two Doves. There should have been the Dove that he had been hallucinating all summer, who was a genuine... Have any of you seen The Haunting of Hill House? The father in The Haunting of Hill House has a comfort hallucination of his dead wife that he talks to all the time, that is kind, that is everything his wife was. And then there is the possessed demonic version of his wife's spirit that is trapped in this terrible house called Hill House. And so there are genuinely two versions, the one that he is hallucinating and interacting with, and then there is this other one that other people can also interact with. And so I think, because
that requires a very deft hand. That's a hard thing to portray. That's a very hard thing to weave in if it doesn't come naturally to you. And it obviously it feels very...
The author isn't good at writing.
But also, it makes it so you sit there and you go, did the oak tree go with him to Australia? Because he has been hallucinating his sister all summer. His sister was in the car with him and then got out of the car with him. And then later we're told that the hallucinations he's been having this whole time has been the oak tree monster the whole time. And so you're like, did it just get on a plane and go with him? What was this other thing? And I think it would have worked better to have his comfort hallucination of Dove that he had, and then this other terrible one, and they're fighting against each other. And that, I think it would have been great for the comfort hallucination of Dove to be the one to finally be like, I'm in your head, Andrew.
I thought that's what the message was going to be, but the thing is as I was getting towards the end, I thought to myself, they have not built her up nearly enough for this. And it didn't happen anyway. It was mostly Thomas and Andrew once more. But it really, like, she's his twin. There were so many little pokes and prods from the author, that twin stuff. And yet nothing ever, like, flourishes into something that makes a message out of it. And I really like the idea of the two-sided thing. It's because also wait, before I even say that, it's also such a messy message. It's because, like Fern was saying with the questions about whether or not it was a tree or just hallucination and stuff, it can be both within himself and externally. It could be all internal, but the way this author decided to portray it in this instance doesn't convey anything.
And it makes Dove's death the least impactful thing, and it should be the most impactful thing. Dove is the missing third character of this book. She is so integral on a visceral level that not having her here is wild, because her death is the locus of all of these issues that the book is having. But anyway, let's continue with the plot, because again, we're getting very sidetracked. So eventually he goes into the forest and Thomas is like, don't follow me here. And then another night he goes into the forest again, and Thomas is like, he goes into the forest, it's at night, and Thomas, like, as he's going into the forest, and also, this whole, like, first part, he keeps feeling weird things. Like, there's a part where he thinks Thomas is jumping up behind him, and then something puts its arms around him, and then licks the back of his neck, and he's like, yo, what the fuck, Thomas? But then there's nothing there. There's nothing behind him. And then there's a point where he sees cloven hooves in the bathroom, and he freaks out and has a panic attack.
I'm assuming that all of these are iterations of the creatures he wrote / were created by the two of them. But you know, I have to admit, some of them just don't fit the mold. Like the licking thing with the many arms, love it. That's creepy as hell. Which monster's that one? Like, I mean, I guess I don't need to know, but it just feels like it was starting as one thing and it continued as something different.
I would completely agree. And he also he's playing tennis at one point, and he puts his hand in his pocket, and there's a fuck ton of mushrooms, like just a weird amount of mushroom, like a massive amount that just appeared in his pocket, and he's freaking out about it. And then he goes into the forest at night to find Thomas, because he's like, I just need to deal with this. Like, we need to have an interaction, please. And he goes in, and he feels something in the forest chasing him, and then a giant monster comes out of the forest and is like, I will attack you and scratch at you and fuck you up. And then Thomas comes out of nowhere, barreling into the monster, and he's got a gardening poker thing, and he's like fighting with the monster, and he like stabs the monster to death. But like Andrew runs, it's a whole big thing. Andrew drops his phone. And then Thomas is like, this is why I've been avoiding you, because I was trying to keep you safe, because there are monsters, and they've come for my my drawings. I drew that, and they're coming, and I have to, every night, I have to kill them so they don't jump over the fence and hurt other people, because that's what happened to my parents. This monster wolf thing that you wrote, that in the story you wrote, Andrew, you wrote about a wolf monster coming and killing my parents, metaphorically. It wasn't actually me, but the character was supposed to be me and had abusive parents, so you wrote about a monster wolf killing them, and then this monster wolf came out exactly as I drew it, so it has to be me. I'm terrible and the monster creator, and it killed my parents.
Kids are selfish enough that I could have bought that. However, it is quite silly that Thomas would think, oh, I have to protect other people. Like, not one part of Thomas has been sold to me as an empathetic carer of his fellow students.
Fellow man.
On this. And also, where is the evidence that this will happen? Maybe it was just at his house. Maybe it was something from the back. Could he not have tried to rationalize it another way? Like, it just seems like he already knew what was happening before it was happening, and it feels very unrealistic.
I would say that him immediately being like, it came from the forest, but it somehow got to my parents' house like an hour away from there, and But anyway, and he's like, I've been fighting them in the woods at night. And Andrew's like, I'll fight them with you. You don't have to do this alone, buddy. Also, I lost my phone. You should probably find that. And Thomas is really beat up. And you get two things very quickly. Number one, these things have a physical, actual effect. This isn't something that is happening in the boy's mind because Thomas has all of these wounds. And I mean, you could have played it later if it was like a twist that it was something else doing it. But anyway, that's not it. You immediately understand these are real things that have physical effects, but you're not sure, does it just have effects on them at this point because they are perceiving it, versus if you don't know about it, it won't hurt you. Which, then how did it kill his parents? Did they, like, what is the what's happening here? And so immediately you're like, oh, this is an interesting thing. This is still at the stage where you're like, wow, what a great setup. We know there's a terrible thing that happened last year. Dove is upset. I wonder what she's upset about, because again, at this point, you don't know she's dead. But you are like, I wonder why there's not more Dove in this story, if they're supposed to be best friends. And then you also get this thing where our boy Tom, his drawings are coming to life and they are wreaking fucking havoc. What is happening? But you as the reader are like, why did Andrew have mushrooms in his pockets? Why are these things like, is it just like, that's weirdly focused on our boy. And so you know that there's something, but immediately like, this is a great setup for some mystery, some let's solve the problems. When are we going to find out what happened last year? What context will it give? And you think that Andrew's just not thinking about it, but he knows what happened last year. And later you realize, oh no, he's completely repressed the thing. But it's a great setup. At this point, I was in on this story. I was ready. I was here. I was locked in, ready to go.
Andrew, at this point, right, we've already said he's not eating. He's like starving. He feels empty but full at the same time. What lit my memory to this was that when you mentioned the mushroom in his pocket, right? So you get this sense as the plot wow, I got really white when the sun went down. Anyway, as the plot progresses, you get this like feeling that he's being like, because again, don't let the forest in inherently makes you think, oh, is it like growing within him? Or something like that, especially with all these things happening. And at one point, which we will get to, there is this creature that puts like I've already mentioned it before too, it goes into his ear and then it like plants a seed behind his ear, and then later on he pops it and mud comes out and it's a seed and ew, gross plants. But then there's also like the concept of something growing inside of him, because there are moments where it says his stomach is distended.
That only happens at the very end.
Yes, I know. But like it progresses towards the end, right? What I'm getting at here, right, is that you've got the idea of the seed taking root. And as the rest of the story progresses, like he feels like it's burrowing. Well, actually, it disappears after a while, but he feels like it's continuing to burrow into his skull between his sinew and everything as it goes into that, which is horrific, and that's fun. But like, and then it also later on like gives you the visual of his belly, like he's so concave, and then slowly but surely something's growing within him. But you have the seed behind his ear, and then you have later on his belly descending, which is a mixed message of where this thing is growing. Where is this originating from? What's the seed got to do? Like the seed's obviously from the forest, plants and shit, right? But like then you have like the wood and vines churning under his skin where his stomach is. I thought. And I'm leading up to this. I thought, and I was so angry when it didn't happen because I thought it would be horrendous. I thought we were going to get some body horror where he like literally gave birth to his sister, like a reincarnated version of his sister.
His sister? Oh my
yes, from
God.
his belly.
Katie! You goddamn,
cool.
that is so much more interesting than what happened.
Well, that's what I thought it was getting at. I thought that's why I was like in it for the game. I was like, okay, all this like love, angst and everything, but surely because of the distended belly part and the seed thing, and it felt like it was trying to plant something in him, I'm like, okay, so he's gonna give birth to the evil version, the antichrist of his sister, basically, right? Surely, or something like that.
Nope.
No, none of that happens.
Nope.
But I just wanted to mention it before I forgot, because I thought that would have been a wicked cool way for the whole story to end, is just rip open his stomach.
No, Dove would have to be so much more important for that. But anyway, so he starts doing this, and then eventually he convinces his Thomas, him and Thomas go on an art trip to go into the city because he's like, I want to buy you some art supplies so you can draw stuff, because they're like, okay, it's your art, so we need to destroy your sketchbooks. Maybe your sketchbook is possessed, so let's destroy the sketchbook. And then he's like, let's get you some new sketchbooks, so like, and new art supplies so you can do your stuff. And there's this whole thing about Andrew being legitimately rich and Thomas's parents being wealthy, but in a way where like Thomas himself doesn't actually have any money, especially now that his parents are dead. And again, by this point in the book, everybody has now decided Thomas killed his parents, which is a wild thing. Number one, why do they know this? Nobody else was there during the police investigation. It's just a wild thing for it to get around. And they keep talking about it. So they end up going to the art thing. And while they get the art supplies, they also buy a hatchet so they have something better to defend themselves with against the forest. And they have to hide it because school's super strict. And like they fought some pixies before this. And then, why didn't they get 2 hatchets? There's 2 of them. Why would they just
I'm sure they're going to run out of hatchets at some point, and the blade is going to I'm sorry.
Also, it's America. Just get a gun.
Just something.
It is Virginia.
They go back, and it is after this point where we kind of get introduced to the terrible, awful, no good, bad Mr. Clemens, which is this teacher. And the way the author originally set it up was really interesting, but then just ended up being laughable, because she goes, on the first day that Mr. Clemens started school, everybody universally decided he was hot. By the second day, everybody universally decided he was the worst. And it would have been so much more interesting if he was like, just so, because there are teachers that aren't necessarily bad meaning, but they're so tied to their own rules, their own expectations, or like there's those teachers where they're incredibly good at their subject, but they cannot teach for their lives. And so they are not good teachers despite knowing the subject matter very well. And to have it be more of that and them just not getting this teacher and have him be, but no, he is a mustache twirling asshole.
So that's my third point, by the way. My original third point was we have Mr. Clemens, who seems like he's going to be an important minor character, especially when it comes to opposition and like anything opposing for the boys to be able to be successful.
Yeah. Nothing gets done with him. He's just mustache twirling.
And the reason I mentioned him is because this the bad interaction with Mr. Clemens happens before their art trip. He's also the instructor, one of the instructors going on the art trip with them. And they get their hatchet, they're able to do stuff, but then the forest, once they get the hatchet, is really quiet. No monsters are coming out at them. They keep going in at night, and the forest is just like, they hear like noises and like cackling, and they can hear the rustling in the trees, but none of the monsters are coming out to deal with them. So they're like, wow, hatchet scared them. Great news for us. And so they kind of go back to life. Neither of them are doing their homework. Andrew's like, Dove does my homework. And it's around
no wonder
this point.
Dove is pissed off. Like, dude, do your homework.
It was at this point that I immediately was like, oh yeah, Dove's fucking dead. We haven't seen her, and you should. Like, at this point, you should have seen Dove. It's been long enough into the year. But anyway, and so they're having like just a chill day doing stuff, and then like kaiju attacks. Like a monster comes out of like vines, ripped through like a wall, and there is this, they call it like the like Elf King, and it's this like creature of twigs and stuff that has a crown that's like burrowing into its head, and it's like, rah! And Thomas is like, it's here for me, go in another direction, Andrew. I'll get the hatchet and take it and get it away from you, because the entire thing is Andrew's always like, he doesn't think I'm capable, he has to deal with everything, and he's just trying to protect me. And so he's running, and he's like, "Ooh, I got away." And then Mr. Clemens comes out of nowhere, and it's like, "Oh, hey, I was in the forest, and I found your cell phone, even though it's been weeks, and it still has battery, and we don't find out why it had battery or any of this. And I could tell because it's a photo of you and your sister on the screen." And he's like, "What the fuck?" And he's like, "We're going to the principal's office, Andrew." And Andrew's like, "Can you hear that screaming and stuff? Like, because like at this point they realize like." It is attacking the school, and it is actually, people are screaming, there are vines growing out of walls, like, we need to, and Mr. Clemens is like, oh, those senior pranks.
No, that's not, I mean, yes, that too. No, but then it's like the author decided to just kick us while we're down for our expectation for what this character could have been, and made him extra smarmy, because he was like, we don't need any of your mental illness in our institution. And I'm like, oh, come on, bro. Could he be any more hateful? Like, stop.
He's so cartoonishly hateful that it just... Anyway, so he's dragging Andrew to the principal's office, and they're in the faculty corridor, and then he's like, "Mahaha, twirl, twirl," and then a vine shoots out of the wallpaper, grabs him, and starts, like, hoisting him up, and then the monster comes out of nowhere, and is like, "I need a tithe. The tithe must be paid." And Andrew's like, "Take this guy. Fuck this guy. I don't even like him. You can take him." And so then the monster, because Andrew remembers when he wrote the story that this guy is based off of, this guy took people's faces as tithe. And so Andrew's like, take his face. And the monster is like, "Your boy,"
all right,
takes his face, and then looks at Andrew, caresses down his face, and is like, my prince. And this is the moment where you go, Andrew's gonna get it now, because the entire time, Andrew's been like, "We need to destroy your photo, your pictures. Don't draw any monsters. Thomas, it's really fucking wild that you keep making these monsters." Meanwhile, all the monsters that are showing up are monsters based on the stories Andrew writes. Andrew is a writer, and he is not just like, "Oh, I doodle poetry." He writes short, like flash fiction, fucked up fairy tales. That's what he writes.
This is the part where the thorns, the intense, like...
The vine goes into his ear.
Yes. I thought it was such a loss on imagery. The author inundates their language so much with so much half-formed metaphor, which I know how to spot that, because that is my error I make a lot in when I would write stuff, is I start doing a really, what I thought was a cool metaphor, but then the metaphor wouldn't come full circle. So my writing professor all the time would be like, "You have a lot of really cool metaphors, but you got to pick and choose which ones you want to actually follow through with, because otherwise it's just a menagerie of a whole bunch of half images." And so that's what's happening here.
This author struggles with that.
Yeah, severely. But anyway, wait, there was something I was going to say. Shit. It doesn't matter, I guess. But yeah, that's where the little curly Q goes into his ear. He rips it out. There's a seed now behind his ear for some reason.
Specifically, again, back to my point. This entire time, he's been like, "Fuck you, Thomas, and your terrible drawing. You can't draw anything. Stop drawing. We must destroy all of your books. How do these monsters keep appearing, Thomas?" And again, all of the monsters are only ones that have been inspired by Andrew's story. So you as the reader at this point are like, oh, prior to this point, ooh, there's my, okay. Prior to this point, I was like, ooh, is this the two of them coming together in their grief and their problems, creating something?
That is also what I thought.
Yes. So you think this is a combination, but then at this point, when the monster talks directly to Andrew, strokes his face, and is like, "My prince, I fucking love you." That's not what it says, but it's basically the equivalent. Like the forest is like, "My dark prince." Yeah. And you're like, oh no, it's just Andrew. You, the reader, and you're like, this is when Andrew figures it out. This is when Andrew goes, oh no, it's not after Thomas. It's me. I'm the one they want. It talked to me as the prince. I wrote the stories. Nope. Immediately after this, he's like, "Wow, Thomas, did you keep drawing? Where are your other notebooks, Thomas? Fuck you, Thomas."
He's like, "Thomas, have you been hiding these drawings from me someplace? Or have we killed all of them? Have we burned every single one of your creations that have nothing to do with the actual problem?"
He'll keep doing this till really late in the book. Like, man, he must have been drawing them in secret. Oh, that's so weird. It's weird how my writing can affect them, but his is the one creating.
Yeah,
so dumb.
Fucking.
I'm gonna very quickly kind of go through, because there's some bonding with Lana and this girl Chloe, because Andrew is like, "Yeah, I'm asexual,"
which was the best part of the book, honestly.
Yeah, it's so good. Like, I'm gonna blow past it, but the scenes where he bonds with Lana and Chloe and the GSA, and him comes to terms with his sexuality and realizing it's not weird, great, fantastic. I can't talk about it because we gotta talk about the other shit. So there's a point where Thomas is getting fucked up, and Andrew's like, "I wrote this story. I'll just about how this and this the monster's doing what I wrote." Again, no connection. If you think any connection is going to be had, zero. And he goes, "I'll write a different ending."
It is very strange because the narration is like, you, the reader, are like, "Oh, okay, I drew this conclusion. We're here now." But fucking Andrew himself, that never actually clicks. He just does it randomly almost.
So he gets a pen, he has a marker in his thing, and he writes on a tree a different version of the story where, because like this monster has shot a tongue into Andrew, into Thomas, and is sucking his blood out, and he's like dying. And so he writes a different story where that by touching Andrew or Thomas, it'll blow up and turn into ash, and it does. And Thomas is like, yo, my guy, how did you do that? And he was like, I just wrote a different story. And they were like, awesome, fill your pockets with pen, buddies.
Still must be my artwork.
And you're like, are both of them dumb? Because you're sitting there like, Thomas should be like, hey, maybe it's not just my art, buddy. And Andrew is now, like, he literally now knows that he can physically affect and rewrite the way these monsters work to the point that he can defeat them. And he's still like, wow, Thomas, fuck your art, and like, why do you keep doing this to us? Like, we've got to solve this problem.
Okay, but also at this point as well, I have to say though, some of the successes of the author are the body horror, despite it being like too much.
Yes.
Like, if this author could learn to hone their skill, there's this idea after the monsters like burns to a crisp into ashes or whatever, that which is freaked me out still to this moment, where I'm like, was this ever resolved? But then I guess like we don't know what, if anything's resolved at the end, I suppose. But like, poor Thomas has had this creatures like I forget what they're called on butterflies, but the thing,
Little pixies.
Yeah. No, it wasn't a pixie. It was the big creature.
Oh, this one with the weird nose tongue.
Proboscis.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. But it like stuck into him, right? And so it dies. Yeah. But afterwards,
he just has a hole in his stomach.
He just has a black hole that when when Andrew pictures sticking his fingers through it, feels like it would just be emptiness to his spine. And I'm like, that's fucking terrifying. How does he live after this? Is his stomach okay? Like, none of these are answered.
No blood, no nothing. Just super weird thing. Sucks to suck, Thomas. But anyway, as we kind of work past this, a scene that also happens that I thought was a great scene. Like, you're like, wow, that was a really well done scene. After that, like the Elf King monster planted that thing in his ear, he gets like a boil and he lances it with a paper clip, and mud and sap drips out, and a seed and like some vines, and he like freaks the fuck out.
I would too.
And Thomas comes in and is like, what's happening? And he was like, it was inside me. And they were like, oh god, let's clean it. And then it grows up again, and he says specifically that he feels it growing in now instead of out.
I think in this moment, if we're going with my idea a little bit, in the moment where the dumb teacher dies, instead of it going into his ear, which is so random, like metaphorically, why doesn't it shove itself down his throat and literally leave a seed in his belly? And then that way later on, when he gets sick because he's eaten something and he goes to vomit, he vomits up just like
leaves,
a whole bunch of refuse. And it's just like, that would have been weird, cool, and made more sense, because nothing ever really truly comes except for a flower bursting out of his eye right here, which means nothing. Like, that's not representative of something. Like, except for maybe the blindness being popped. Anyway.
That's what I want to talk about for a minute, is that this whole stuff with the forest and the drawing and Thomas and the body, none of it means anything. None of it is a coherent metaphor for grief or codependency. So, for example, I thought, too, it was going to be this thing where it's like, oh, him and Thomas together can create this awful thing, and this is a metaphor for how they're codependent on each other.
Yeah.
The thing is, they're not codependent on each other. They're fine. This is one of the problems with the book, is that Andrew and Thomas are just fine. They're not that toxic. They're just kind of buddies. Like, the book doesn't want... The book keeps saying that there's a lurking darkness in Andrew, but, like, not really. There's like a little bit here and there, but it's very informed. You're never really shown him doing particularly bad things.
I think the grossness of the codependency is more on the ineptitude of either one of them without the other, more so than the other. But like, It's just gross.
It's not
just,
really shown though. Like
no,
they're not.
Not at
Yeah,
all. Not really. It's said overtly by frickin' Andrew again and again, but it's not shown like you said.
I mean, the only time it's really shown is with Dove, where Andrew's like, "Oh God, I got to talk to a teacher." Usually, Dove handles the talking part, and I was like, "Yes, as somebody with social anxiety, that is a thing that happens when I hang out with Maria. That is a codependency thing, and it's not even like the two of them are like destroying each other in their grief, and
Yeah,
that's what's
that's true.
creating this forest. It's not even like." The forest is a metaphor for violence, and Andrew is so mad at all these people he blames for Dove's death, which really have nothing to do with Dove. And so it's a force it's a violence that's toxic and not really going anywhere. None of this means almost anything.
It doesn't connect in the way, like, because I too thought this was perhaps a thing about their codependency, even in their grief, that the fact that neither of them are processing it and are avoiding dealing with it, so it is manifesting through their art. And especially if their stories or the art would have been like the underlayer of it would have been about grief, like having lost something, trying to find something, but none of that is there. It's at this point where you begin to get a little frustrated with the book, especially because we keep having these monsters and you're just waiting for Andrew to put it together that he is at play.
And also, like, I think that's a good transition point, honestly. And I'm sorry to like throw this in afterwards because that was a great like point to go for. But how great would it have been of a balance if their two codependency, like their two approaches to their codependency, is what birthed within him the incarnation of a darker version of his sister that is only pure need that she needs from both of them because she didn't want them to be not a group. She was unhappy. Later on we learn that, of course, Thomas wanted to ask Andrew out and she wanted the three of them to stay exactly as they were. And so, like, it's almost like a curse they put onto themselves. That, like, what a wonderful, beautiful mixing of a message that's just farted on.
I also thought that the message should have been here, because especially when you find out the thing, I'll talk about this at the end. I won't do it now because it only becomes applicable later. But anyway, and also what is happening while all of this is happening is Andrew and Thomas are getting closer in a romantic way, where Andrew has been selling to himself like the whole time, and you as the reader know that Thomas isn't interested in Dove, but he keeps being like, Thomas is in love with Dove. Thomas is in love with Dove. If they kissed, I would be so upset. Thomas is in love with Dove. And you're like, no, motherfucker, he's in love with you. It's very obvious. And other people also know that it is very obvious that Thomas is in love with you. And I get it when you have wrapped so much of what you think all the best, especially like the idea of being a twin and there's the one that gets all the attention and always gets the stuff and you're like the shadow twin, like on the side. And thinking no one could like me. If there's anything they like about me, then they would like Dove more. I understand that. That's fine. Whatever. But there's points where they start like, Thomas like will touch him and he'll be like, I must be reading that wrong. But it also gets to the point where Thomas is eventually like, do you care about me? I feel like I'm being very obvious and I have no idea what the fuck's going on in your brain. And they end up having like a disagreement because Andrew is basically trying to say like, I don't want to deal with this because even though I do like Thomas, he will want more from me and I can't give it to him, and then that'll ruin this relationship and then we won't even be friends anymore. So I don't want to deal with it. Now, this I will give this book. That is something teenagers do.
Yes.
I remember in my head concocting a reality that was not true. Not true. You write a whole, and it's one of the places where I was like, oh, this feels like a teenager. He is literally created, and that inhibits him from acting on things, but also allows him, what it does, and this is what it does as teenagers when you do this a lot of times, is you create this reality where, well, that's what's going to happen. So I don't even have to try being brave because I know what's going to happen. So you make it so you're protected from your own fear, inability to act, failure, and you just protect, you've invented this thing and you have to believe it to, so I like this part. But they end up having a bit of a, and I like that they have a little bit of a like the miscommunication. Thomas doesn't understand, and they like, whew, they have their third act breakup.
I would say, like, if it weren't for the repetitive nature of this, that would work very, like, at Will, after you, I want to highlight Angry Authors comment, because it's tickling
Okay,
me.
so here's the thing. And this has been an element of the book up until this point. But the thing is, this book is extremely dramatic and intense about Andrew's feelings. And to an extent, that makes sense. Teenagers do get overly dramatic and think everything is the end of the world, and like the world is about them. And that's just a natural being part of a teenager. But the thing is, as a book, you as the author kind of have to puncture that every once in a while to remind people that, like, no, they're a teenager. They're taking this a little too seriously. And the book never does that. The book is on their side. The book thinks it's this serious all the time. And their relationships are like this intense. And it's like, no, like this is a problem where the book, again, it is driving, the author is too in love with their pairing. And they're not letting the reader get ahead of it and want it. It's like, no, here, have all of the intensity and fever touch and all of this stuff. And with Andrew, there is an extent to which people do stupid things, but it's also really annoying to the reader when characters do stupid things. So you kind of have to walk the line where it's like, if Andrew were a little bit more aware that he's being paranoid about Dove and Thomas, being in love, that would be one thing, but he's really not. After a certain point, he's very like, oh no, this is happening. And it's like, no, you idiot. It's not even played for laughs. Like, that would actually be kind of funny if other characters thought we're like, you're dumb, or the narrative portrayed it that way. But there is a teenage bombastic drama to this book that the book validates, and so it makes it hard to take it seriously. And I really did not enjoy that part of it.
There's also just too many things that Andrew ignores. There's so many ways in which Andrew just like refuses to look at stuff, or it's not even sold as Andrew's refusing to acknowledge what's in front of his face, because like that would be something else where if Andrew's like, don't say it, we need to say it the same, like we can't. You know, if it's something that he just regularly is like, you know, Andrew knows, but he's pretending he doesn't know, and that it's easier for him that like it would be different if it would be easier for him if Thomas was in love with Dove, because then he would never have to deal with what he feels the inadequacies are in himself. And if that's the way it was spun, where he's purposely forcing this idea, but it's not sold that way. You think he genuinely, because he gets upset, he gets angry at the two of them, and
no,
you're like,
but you know what should have happened is that again, it all comes back again to the dual nature of Dove, and how if there were two of her type of thing, or the vibe of that type of thing, where she was involved more. The idea, so towards the end that we're about to get to, the quote unquote Dove, that he still believes to be Dove, is like, oh no, my dear sweet summer child, I'm real. Nobody else you thought you were talking to was real. Why introduce that at the climax, in the middle of the climax? That should have been introduced.
It is such a dumb concept.
Yes,
that entire thing is just the dumbest.
Yes, it's so very obvious that it's a ploy to confuse him, but not you, the reader. And he's already confused enough. We don't need to make him any more confused. It is already annoying. So backtrack that into utilizing Dove more, and Dove being like, what do you mean you talked to so-and-so? He's not here this year. And like, and then have that murk itself up if you wanted to utilize that feature towards like the beginning of what we're about to get to, which I'm assuming is the climax, the Halloween party.
Not yet. I have to go over some of the Halloween stuff.
Oh, sweet God.
Just because it adds some context. And the other thing I need to say is there are a lot of scenes where other characters interact with Thomas. Bryce Kane interacts with Thomas. Lana interacts with Thomas. Chloe says all the girls in her year have a crush on Thomas, and acknowledges I'm prefacing this right here to say Thomas interacts with a lot of people. There was police officers. Everyone in school thinks Thomas killed his parents. he keeps getting in trouble, and Bryce Kane does something where he like tries to get Andrew in trouble so that he'll get expelled to hurt Thomas. So just remember that. Just put this away. So on Halloween, there's this point where something bad had happened, like a monster, and this is right at the point where I nearly rage quit this book, where something like a monster popped up and caused. Oh yeah, there was in the dinner room, a monster came in and Thomas is like, I didn't draw that. I didn't draw that monster. It like comes out of the wall again. And Thomas is like, I didn't draw that. And Andrew's like, you must have fucking drawn it. You just probably forgot. But Andrew acknowledges that he wrote this monster. This particular monster he knows he wrote about. And please note, this entire time, this entire school year, as he harasses my boy Thomas to not draw anything, fuck you, Thomas, he continues to writing his fucked up stories all the time. Ooh, I'm writing in my journal all the time. No forethought, no thinking. This monster bumps out. Everyone falls asleep by virtue of the monster except for Andrew. Andrew is the only one who isn't affected. He like pulls the people he cares about under table, and then he writes a different version of the story on the table above him, and then completely forgets the thing that he wrote that would kill the monster, but magically ends up doing it anyway. And he defeats the monster, and he's standing on the table like, I did it! I am victorious! I am strong boy! And then Thomas is like, yo, what the fuck happened? Did you not fall asleep? The rest of us fell asleep. And Andrew's like, you must have fucking drawn that monster. And it was at this point, and he goes, do you have any other drawings around? And at this point, they even found like a sketchbook of Thomas's that Dove had in her room that Lana still had, and they destroyed that. And
Thomas.
Yeah, and Andrew's like, well, you must have drawings somewhere that we don't know about that we need to destroy. And it was at this point that I literally just wanted to shove my fist through Andrew's face. Because at this point, there's so much overwhelming evidence that the monsters are caused by Andrew and not Thomas's fucking drawings. And it is so obvious that it makes you hate Andrew for being a fucking idiot.
From that point on, I was like, Andrew, you're not even cool.
You're the worst. I rage quit the book because I was like, I cannot hear. And he was like, I'm going to go to the art room to destroy the last of his art. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You giant fucking idiot. Like, what are we doing? And I hated him. But anyway, the story must continue. It's Halloween. The boys decide before they go to deal with the witching hour, because like as it's been getting closer to Halloween, the monsters are getting more rowdy. You know, that one popped out at dinner. And also the school keeps being like, wow, what a weird gas leak. Like, it's just a real, like how they handle it is just a real...
Pause. How do they know that things are going to get worse on Halloween? They're very actively like, oh, things are going to get really bad on Halloween because it's the witch, blah, 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 Samhain, or whatever. Samhain. What folklore are they follow it? Where they're like, yes, it will be the worst on Halloween because goth. Like,
yeah, it really is, actually. There's not really given a coherent, like, oh, this is the ideology we're dealing with, so why would you think it would be worse, really? I will just say that, like, it is incredibly frustrating that Andrew is not putting this together. And again, unlike the Dove thing, which I think it should be dropped in earlier, but in this case, there's no reason for him not to fit. There's two elements. There's two things that are the monsters are reflective of. Why would you not immediately think maybe it's your writing?
Immediately when Thomas is like, I create monsters, who will ever love me? Be like, hey buddy, those monsters come out of my stories. I'm part of the creation. Let's bear this together. No, Andrew refuses at every point. And it doesn't even read like I'm avoiding thinking about it, because he just, like, the evidence is like glaring in his face. He realizes that his writing can change it. He was the only one that didn't fall asleep. And the forest keeps being like, hello, my prince. How you doing? We like ya. Bury a heart in the forest. There's a point where it says that to him.
At this point, I was like, you know what? Just take Andrew. Leave Thomas. He can be friends with Lana and Chloe. and they can just be besties.
I was here for Lana and Thomas redemption arc, because the entire time Lana's like, fuck Thomas, he's the reason that everything happened with Dove, and Andrew's like, wow, it's real weird you said it that way, like, why would you say it that way? And and also everyone around, like, there's also an entire conversation where Lana's like, does he know his sister's dead? And Thomas is like, of course he does. What are you talking about? And she's like, I don't think he does, bro.
And Andrew's like, that's weird.
I wonder what this conversation is. They decide they put on their tuxes to go to the Halloween party, and Andrew's like, and as he's getting ready for the Halloween party, he takes off his shirt and he's like, oh my God, my stomach's distended. And he feels it, and there's vines and things moving in there, and he feels moss on his tongue. There was also a point where he touched Bryce Kane, and when he took his hand away, there was moss on him, and you're like, oh, the forest is in him. It is all up inside him, and you're thinking, okay, now he's gonna get it. Now he's gonna put it together.
It makes such a nice sense, though, for him, because he is a twin, for him to be the mirror image of the reincarnation of his dead sister, combined with this malevolent spirit of some sort, whether it was summoned by the sorrow and codependency and vileness of, like, their feelings or whatever, or whether it was truly there to begin with, and it, whatever. Regardless, like, that is such a nice, a very horribly beautiful thing that matches the tone this author wants to create. And I just don't understand how they missed it.
It was right there. But anyway, and Thomas comes in looking rakish in suspenders and dress pants. Andrew's like, I can't let you know what's happening. So he puts a shirt on and he's like, I'm not going to tell him, even though I should, because he knows everything. Like, why wouldn't I tell him that this is happening right now? And then Thomas is like, you ready to go? And he's like, I got to do something really quick. Meet you at the auditorium. And Thomas is like, yeah, bro, let's have fun before we have to deal. Like, this is so bizarre. These two boys have built up this entire book, or at least a chunk of this book, that shit's gonna go down on Halloween. And instead of preparing, getting more weapons, assembling things, they're like, let's go to the dance party because we know shit won't get real until 2 a.m. when it's the witching hour. So they go to, and he...
How do they know that? How do they know that? Where did it say that?
Everything always happens at 2 a.m., I guess. But anyway, so, again, he found the vines inside him. He feels shit moving around. He can feel, like, thorns at the back of his throat. Our boy, Andrew, he should be like, wow, none of this is happening to Thomas. Why is it happening to me? But he's like, let me go to the art room and destroy whatever the last of his artwork is, because this guy just is not taking...
The more you repeat it, the most absurd...
It's so true, though.
It's so annoying. But he's like, he just is not taking the need to destroy his art seriously enough. So he goes into the art room, he looks around, and the only thing he can find is Thomas's final art piece, like for his class, like the thing that he is going to be graded on for his art class. And it is a beautiful picture in pastels, something Thomas never works in before. And it is a portrait of the three of them. Dove, Andrew, Thomas. Thomas in the middle with his Perot twins on either side. Dove's got feathers around her face. Thomas has roses coming out of his eyes. And he hadn't finished drawing Andrew yet. And Andrew looks at this and goes, see? I knew he was still drawing, and rips it in half. And is like, gotta do what we gotta do, bro. And at this point, you're like, you're a monster. Like, and not in a way where, like, the author is trying... I don't think the author was trying to do this, but you're like, you're a terrible person, Andrew. Like, legitimately, nobody should like you.
No. Andrew, the whole way through, is a bad person, and not in a good way. Like, there is a good way to do a bad person, and this is not it.
He rips up the art, and then he goes to and he's still holding, and also while he's there, the art room has just exploded into the forest. Like, there's leaves on the floor, vines growing out of the ceiling, all of this stuff. He rips up the art thing, and then he looks up and he sees a foot, and he reaches up and he grabs the ankle.
Oh, this is such a fun part, though.
And it is a foot, and he looks up, and it is Bryce Kane hanging from the ceiling with vines. Yes. And it's just all of him all over, and it's terrifying. It is, and he's like, and again, oh my God, he's like, well, I told him I'd kill him, so the forest killed him for me. Wow, Thomas's drawings really suck. Rip.
It doesn't. You'd think he would get it at this point. You would think there has been enough evidence laid at this dumb idiot's feet that he would understand. But he's still. And so at this point, you just want to punch the author's face in. Because you're like, what is the purpose, my dude, my person? What is the goal here, author? Why are you doing this to me? Are you trying to point out that Andrew has actually been a problematic human this whole time and he has things he actually has to deal with? Is Thomas going to be like, you haven't been a good friend, my guy, and as much as I love you, I have some problems and you need to deal with your shit? Is the book going to make that commentary? Is it going to do any of that? No. Andrew just gets to be an idiot.
I will say, the other thing to note here is that the author is not actually that good at writing horror. Now, I have been spoiled by reading The Troop by Nick Cutter, which is sublime body horror and just horror in general. But this book is not really that creepy. There's the part of the problem with creepiness is it's a thing that's built up throughout the tone of the book up until that point. It's in how realistic the characters are. It's how they think about the world. It's what the horrible thing happening means to them. And in this case, and also it's just, the prose in the moment. And the author isn't really able to do any of those things because the book is so overwrought with emotion in the, relationship scenes that you don't really feel like it's that important when this horror stuff happens. Andrew himself is never really that affected by it. He's just like, oh, that was kind of scary. And the prose themselves are just like the concepts are not that scary. This really should be a more atmospheric and horror book, and it isn't. And that's the thing, is that it would work fine as a fanfic. Another thing I didn't mention is that the middle portion of this book is really meandering. There's no stakes set up. It's like, okay, we're fighting.
No mini plots.
Yeah, we're fighting the forest and we're having relationship talks, but there's no lingering question of what's going to happen or tensions building. It's just one moment to another.
And the characters aren't peeling back. One of the things we discussed
Yes.
in the Sherlock Holmes book is that the characters get enough tidbits that they can put together that at all the points it feels like it's building towards something. And as I said, despite the reader getting the tidbits and realizing, at no point do you feel like the characters are constructively putting together anything.
The other thing is that none of the characters tend to have more layers once you know them. So at the beginning, Andrew feels like a real character, but then you're never actually shown oh, he has anger issues in this regard. Or no, excuse me, Thomas. Thomas is not really shown to have anger issues in any regard. You don't get to see new layers of their behavior and their behavior in different places. It's the same interactions over and over and over again.
Thomas has a whole thesis to his issues, beyond Andrew. And I mean, Andrew has the same problem. And it is brought up twice very distinctly. But again, the thematic notes of this never come through. It's what happens after we graduate, which is a very coming of age story. That's a pretty basic coming of age note. And not just that, where do we go when we go past the place where we knew Dove or our friendship? The nature of our friendship, the nature of our lives so far.
You mean that's maybe why the Force is trying to grab onto Andrew as a metaphor for what do we do outside of knowing where Dove was? Oh, that would be interesting.
Yes.
That would be great.
You're stuck in the same place forever in that. And again,
you cannot leave.
It's told to us many times that Andrew loves, Thomas loves the forest, a lot. And that's why the twins wound up finding love in the forest as well, because as a trio, they went out there and hung out at this one tree, which should have been highlighted so many times. I feel like we should have had, not that I love flashbacks, but I felt like we really should have had flashbacks about their times at that tree or some type of callback to important conversations. And all those important conversations always happened at that tree. And so that way it actually is a symbol in the book itself for staying in one place, rooted in the ground, unable to move. And then the whole idea of Thomas being terrified of what's going to happen after graduation, especially since his parents are freaking dead, but ignore the fact that his parents are dead. Let's pretend they were alive. Abusive, negligent parents, no money to himself, no real aspects or dreams at the moment because he's lived himself inside of Andrew for so long that he doesn't have maybe his own goals and aspirations, which would be a wonderful portrayal of codependency, of not knowing what you want in life past graduation because all you've been able to find your identity is in one other person who also doesn't know what they want to do and is very lost and unable to control themselves and very codependent. Like that whole back and forth is a wonderful portrayal, and the Forest being representative of them being stuck a stasis in time would have been great.
I think what you said there about the codependency of not having your own identity because so much of it has been put in somebody else, that I think is what's really missing from this book. Because again, Andrew and Thomas are fine. They actually function fine on their own. Like, there at no point do you really get the sense that, like, oh, without the other, they would be completely lost. Because that happens for a bit, and mostly Andrew just needs to get on some antidepressants. Like, it really is one of these things where it's like, you don't ever get moments of how much they can't function without each other, and how toxic it is, and how they both kind of invite that.
And the book tells you that. Like, the book tells you that they can't function without each other, but it never shows it. There's literally a scene where Andrew goes, and I quote, it's not a perfect quote, but from memory, I needed to put my lungs in Thomas's lungs so I could remember how to breathe. And so
That's
the
not
book
good.
is like, the book is like, this codependent as hell, but then in the scenes
The
and stuff,
actions don't show that.
it doesn't feel actually codependent. And I'm gonna, so just to get through, because there's a point I really want to make about how to utilize Dove, them as a friendship, and also how to bring the romance into this in a way that feels like it is dealing with the issues at hand. And so to preface this, I need to say, prior to this point, Thomas has confessed to Andrew, and the two of them, as I mentioned, are getting closer. But anyway, he gets to the party, and there's a point where Lana and Thomas are talking, as I mentioned, having this conversation, and Andrew gets dragged outside by Bryce's friends, who are like, "Where's Bryce? He told us you threatened to kill him." I don't know who would be like, "Oh yeah, Andrew, the depressed guy who's like wafer thin because he hasn't eaten all year. That guy's gonna kill Bryce." Bryce wouldn't have been able to deal with that, but they're like fucking with Andrew. They're tossing him around, kind of like half punching him, being like, "Where's Bryce? Where's Bryce?" Thomas comes out of nowhere, like goes in swinging. Lana comes in. There's a fight happening, and our boy says something akin to, "I just need to talk to Dove. Let me go get her. I can talk to Dove." And everybody's like, "Oh shit, he thinks Dove's alive." And Thomas now realizes that Lana was indeed correct. This is something they were worried about. And Andrew fucks off. He fucks off, and he ends up having a conversation with Dove, being like, with hallucination Dove. And Dove's like, "Oh," and Andrew's like, "I have to go into the forest. I have to show you what I've been dealing with. Let's go into the forest." He goes into the forest. They're kind of dealing with something. Something happens, but Dove is left behind. Oh no, this is the part where she's like, "By the way, you've been hallucinating Thomas this whole time. He hasn't been here, guy. Like, he got taken out the first week of school because he killed his parents. Like, I knew." And it's really weird because in this moment, the book needs to be written in a way where for a minute you can kind of believe it. Like, maybe this notion that you had that Dove was the dead one was wrong. Maybe it was actually Thomas, because it shakes Andrew in a way that makes zero sense. And this is the part where I ask you to remember where I said 100 people have interacted with Andrew and with Thomas the whole time. And have had conversations, and he's been a topic of conversation at multiple points versus Dove. And so for her to be like, "Yeah, I knew you needed time to process him getting taken out of school, so I kind of left you alone." And you're like, that doesn't even make sense. What kind of sibling would be like, "Wow, the person I knew you were really into and your best friend leaves, so I'm just gonna fucking leave you on your own to process this." And like,
also, she's been a jerk this whole time, by the way.
Yes.
This entire time, none of it's made sense whatsoever, her responses to his. It's like they're having two completely different conversations, which is why I thought for 5 seconds that the Forest was false texting her or some shit from his phone or something. Like, I don't know. I just didn't make sense.
yes. And I thought this was going to be the moment Andrew realized she was dead, because everything she was saying made no sense. But no, he for a second is like, "Oh my God."
For a second? You mean for like 20 minutes in
Minutes,
plot?
he's like, "Oh my God, Thomas is not real. I've been, oh my God, life." And then there's a monster attacking.
And then he goes to Thomas and he's like, "Oh, maybe if I bite his chin, I'll know that he's real."
Well, yeah, so a monster is happening. Thomas comes and helps him deal with the monster. And then he was like, and Thomas is like, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have said any of that stuff. And then he's like, are you real? Are you real? And Thomas is like, yeah, I'm here. What do you need, buddy? And he's like, I need you to kiss me. So they kiss. And then Andrew's like, Dove is just behind me. She's coming up behind me. And Thomas is like, oh no, my dude, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to my eyes and my mouth. Dove's dead.
Dramatic flashback to the day she died, which is dumb.
And the thing is, I don't mind this because I liked this brief moment of seeing Andrew and Thomas prior to things getting crazy fucked up, when you realize they weren't codependent, like, people, like, prior to all this stuff, like, that something has fundamentally changed, and, like, you know, they were just two guys who kind of liked each other. And Dove was like, I need to talk to both of you. And Thomas was like, great, let's go, because there's this moment where Thomas and Andrew are too close, and things are getting intimate, and oh my god, quiet eyes. And then Dove pops up, and Thomas yeets himself away from Andrew, and Dove's like, we need to talk. And Thomas is like, let's go into the forest and talk. And she's like, fine, I guess. And Andrew's like, I don't want to go with the two of you. You two go by yourself. And you're like, yo, Andrew, why are you having this interaction? Like, nothing. And what it is that there are times where Thomas and Dove are having a conversation that Andrew isn't a part of actively. And he's like, wow, they're having a whole conversation with their eyes and their mouths and their words. And I'm not interacting because I'm just sitting here quietly, not interacting. And wow, how dare they have a conversation that I'm not a part of, even though I'm sitting right here and I could interact, but I don't. And so he's like, fuck them. They can go have a conversation by themselves if they want to do that. And so he goes off and he goes to sleep. Thomas and Dove go to the forest, and basically the conversation they have is that, and you don't know this, you get from Andrew's perspective, where he wakes up and finds out his sister went into the forest by herself, was climbing a tree, a branch broke, and she died. But what you find out from Thomas is that the conversation, the argument that they were having, was that Dove knew that Thomas was into Andrew, and he was working himself up to asking Andrew out, and Dove didn't want him to because it would change their dynamic, and she didn't want the dynamic to change. She wanted it to stay the same. And Thomas was like, no, you can't, like, Andrew isn't your, like, thing to keep. He's a person. He should get a say in it. And so he doesn't go into the forest with Dove. Dove goes in by herself, ends up dying. Everybody, especially Dove's friends, have been blaming Thomas for leaving her alone, but they say it in a way where you think that, like, the book's trying to be like, do you believe Thomas killed her? Like, which is just really dumb, because you don't.
Wait a second. It also logically doesn't quite make sense, the way it has been built up, that Dove would even go into the forest. Honestly, if we're going to really, like, we're already nitpicking. Let me just say this. Like, Dove doesn't give a fuck about the forest. Dove literally 5 seconds ago was like, no, it's off bounds. We shouldn't be going there. So why would she? I mean, look, again, this is nitpicky at this point. But I would like to say, if anybody were to run off into the forest because they were sad and they want to have a kin to themselves, it would have been Thomas. It would not have been Dove. If we wanted to do a story where Thomas died, perhaps we could have, what's that? But damn it, it's really killing me that I can't think of the name of the book. What's that book called where the girl, it's like coming of age story, and we had to read it. It was on the reading list in, like, middle school or high school, and the girl goes out to their little hiding spot one day, and she swings on the rope swing, and
Bridge to Terabithia.
We could have bridged to Terabithia his ass if we wanted to, and that would have been very heartfelt, very interesting, very fascinating. Would not have fit with anything else, but that would have been very cool, because he is the summer child who will feed himself on rowan berries and be dubbed the fairy king this summer. So, like, that makes sense, but it just, like, I'm like, why did she climb a tree? She doesn't seem like the type of character to climb a tree.
Everything we've been given about her up to that point. But specifically, I want to use this moment to make a huge fundamental point that I think this book could have engaged with, which is Dove is the one that didn't want anything to change. So I think it would have made much more sense of, prior to resolving the issue, Thomas never actually confessing to Andrew and purposefully trying to make sure that their friendship stayed platonic because of his guilt in the part he played. And Andrew doesn't want anything to change because he's still holding on to the idea of his sister being alive, and he would know, and he doesn't want anything to change. So what I would have preferred is these two characters who are stuck in a forced reality of their relationship, of their life. One from refusing to acknowledge his sister's death and thus needing everything to remain the same because of that. The other out of guilt for the thought of him progressing his relationship with Andrew, causing Dove to, go angrily and that whole thing. So these two characters refusing to actually acknowledge their feelings for each other or to change their relationship because they're stuck in this. And then after this whole thing is dealt with, they realize what has been happening after everything. That's when Thomas is finally be able to be like, hey, I like you. Because they realize that they can let go. They can move on. Thomas can let go of his guilt. Andrew can finally let the acknowledge that his sister is dead and process that. And from that kernel of healing and letting Dove go, they're able to actually realize that them having a relationship and their relationship changing is not a terrible thing. And that they're allowed to do it and that it's healthy.
Or because this is like, if you want to go the tragic route, which is what this book kind of does, they don't. They double down. They go, okay, we're never leaving each other. We're going to go farther into this. Because that's what happens in the last, act of this book, if I'm remembering correctly, is basically they get attacked by the forest again. And Andrew is like, ooh, I have to let the forest take me to save Thomas. And Thomas is like, no, I'm so pretty, no. And then Andrew lets the forest get into him and it grows a flower out of his eye.
And then Andrew even says, you know what, you're right, you are too pretty to go. You're going to die too in my story. And that's how he writes the story.
He has to bury a heart. And he's like, I'll bury my heart. And our Thomas is like, does it have to be your heart? Because I read your story and I know what this is going to. And he's like, and he's trying to rewrite. And so he's writing on himself in blood and he's trying to figure this out. And then he's like, okay. And you think there's a moment where the book is like, he cuts out Thomas's heart. He cuts out his own heart. And then they just bury his notebook that the forest had this whole time. There's a moldy notebook of all of his stories and they bury it. And he was like, his art was his heart. And they bury it. So neither of them actually had to bury their heart. Neither of them die. It's not like they're like, and with this burial, I am understanding, I am figuratively burying Dove. It's not like, that's not what's happening.
We could have gone the anime route too, sort of, where they do kill each other or something to that effect. And they bury the heart, blah, blah, blah. And then this barren tree that's always been barren sprouts one singular beautiful flower. But not even that. Not even that.
I did skip something. It is after the point where Thomas tells him that Dove is dead, that the tree version of Dove is like, surprise, I'm a tree. I'm the tree that she died on, and her blood soaked into my roots, and thus I am Dove. And you started this, Andrew. You promised a tithe of a heart, and so we need it. And if you do that, we'll go back to being just a forest. So they bury the notebook. And then the trees go back to being trees, and there's a point where he's cradling Thomas, and he still has a thing jutting out of his eye, and the roots.
And he also, his guts are spilled. His guts are still spilled out, and his guts are made of roots. How is he gonna live past this?
Yes, and he's like, he buried his notebook. It was his heart, and then he's like, Thomas, I need to know we're real. And Thomas, his eyes closed, finally in a sense of peace, kind of sleepy-like, is like, well, kiss me and you'll find out.
And that's how it ends. And it's really fucking stupid.
And I'm going to point something out by highlighting a comment. Fern goes, really? I was for sure Andrew had cut Thomas up and murdered him at the end. I didn't remember the detail of the notebook. You think that for a second. He, instead of going to cut his heart, he realizes his heart is actually in his chest is just a bag of rocks. But in he already gave his heart to Thomas, so he needs to cut out into Thomas's chest to get his heart out, and that they can share one heart together and just combine their bodies into one thing that where one heart
like the
beats
dryads
for both of them.
Like the dryads,
like
I'm
the dryads.
assuming.
And instead of the story being like, well, you need to know how to separate and be your own people and move on from this grief, it's like, nope. And it just ends with them cradling each other and him being like, Thomas, are we real? And Thomas like, let's kiss and find out. And you're like, maybe they're dead and this is their ghosts having this conversation. Like maybe they did die. But
it's so convoluted. It is so convoluted. There's no clear message there in any regard whatsoever. It's not even like, oh, it's convoluted artistically, so that way you're kept guessing. Like at the end of like Inception, it's not even like that. So it's just like a menagerie of ideas being shoved together to mush with each other. And it just, all you get at the end is a cake whose yeast didn't rise.
I really disliked this book. There's a problem where It does a lot of things that are not to my taste, but are not objectively bad for the first half, and then in the second half they become objectively bad because they detract from the book as a whole. They become overly indulgent. A lot of the plots you think are going to go somewhere don't go anywhere. There's no real the author does a huge amount of telling. This book is the author wanting to write about her beautiful, soft, sad boys, and then also maybe something else about a forest. And the thing is that the author also wants to say they're codependent, but won't show it. So, for example, all the times that Andrew like hangs out with Lana and another girl, it's not like Thomas is super upset by this or is jealous or anything. He's super chill about it.
Burns said that too, I think, right here. Look, also, it would have been fun if Andrew, which was the useless one, started finding friendships with Lana and Chloe, and Thomas is the one falling apart without Andrew now. Yeah, any of that could have been utilization for fuel to the fire of their codependency, but it's not.
It's not. It's just there for aesthetics. The whole like, they're consuming love for each other is too much. And again, the forest stuff doesn't come together as a metaphor. This book just, this book is short, by the way, and that kind of is good because it means it would be so much worse if it was longer. But I think, and a lot of times I think longer books should be shorter, but I think in this case, it being short is a signal of how little story the author actually had to tell. And so there's a bunch of elements that don't go anywhere that should be taking up more space, like scenes with Dove. There should be more scenes with Dove.
Or the dad.
Like that plot line should all go towards a culminating thesis that this book doesn't have because all it wants to talk about is how beautiful Thomas is.
It could have worked if what the narrative was getting to, again, connecting to the idea that the two of them have to stay exactly as they are. So any feelings they do have towards each other is a taboo thing. And so I think it would have worked to have the reason Andrew's internal monologue feels like they're codependent is because in his brain they cannot be anything other than a bad thing. Like the two of them having extra feelings for each other can only be bad, and then it is only at the end when he realizes no, that none of that was true. Because like Will made the point where if the book turned around and poked at itself and said, oh wait, that wasn't actually the thing, and subverted the thing and actually being like, oh no, they weren't codependent, he just had to read it terribly because of his inability to process Dove dying, and that their
that would have made more
relationship-
sense too.
Yeah, and especially if it would have turned around and because the book itself, their interactions, Thomas not freaking out when he's making other friendships, Thomas, being happy to go do stuff on his own. Thomas is happy to go, like, he'll deal with problems on his own, he'll handle things, like, these aren't characters that are actually in action doing codependent things, but and that would have worked if the book was like, well, they weren't, I was just reading it that way because of where I was, but now that I've begun the process of grieving Dove, like actually grieving her, I can acknowledge that we are allowed to develop, we are allowed to like each other romantically, I'm allowed to explore this without my sister, and like I need to figure out how to deal with that loss. But I can also, and it just, I think it could have made so much of this book work more if it felt like an intentional thing.
I think if the author just was interested in the story, I think that's really the biggest problem is the author's not really interested in the story.
That I would agree with Will on this point. There is a marketed lack of detail of the plot to the point where you're like, this author just did not know what they wanted to produce from the characters that they had created.
The author had the ending in mind. I think they had specific scenes in mind, and they wrote around those scenes, and the feeling and the emotions of those scenes.
That's how my Naruto fan fiction reads. Like, if you read my Naruto fan fiction, you could tell I had mental scenes, and everything in between is just like...
This book is just fanfic of the author's own characters, which doesn't work because nobody else knows your characters. Now, I do think some people will like this book because, if you are into your soft, sad boys, and if nothing else, Song of Achilles has proved that a lot of people are into that, then, maybe you will ship them somewhat. Even though, again, that's much less likely to be done than in a fanfic. And also, this has asexual representation, and so some people will say that it really impacted them a lot. And my words to you are, demand better.
Yes! Please do. I'm sorry. Whoever your last name is as the author, like...
Drews.
Drew.
Yeah, like, just
Be better.
The thing is, for me, I was in it the first third. I was game for this book.
You got
the first
something
third.
going on in there.
And so it just felt like such a letdown that these pieces didn't coalesce into something more, that it felt like the author was actively, purposefully crippling the character's perception to enable a specific scene, to enable the end scene that they wanted to write. And it just, like, I don't know in a lot of ways how to reconcile the parts that, like, the big issues I have with the parts of this book that I do like, because there are specific scenes that I think they are written well, and I think this author could write a really banger book if, you know, they worked on some of this stuff.
What do you think is literally, structurally, mechanically better? This book or The Spirit Bears Its Teeth?
Oh, I thought you were going to say Song of Achilles. That would have been hard. Spirit Bears Its Teeth is more of a fully formed book than this
That's
book.
what I thought too, as well.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because, like, well, okay. No, wait. Now I want to alter. What do you think is better,
No.
this or Song of Achilles?
It's murder or poison. Like, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to take away from that.
I enjoyed the first third of this more than I enjoyed the first third of Song of Achilles. So for me,
I enjoyed
Yeah.
the first third of this more than I enjoyed the majority of Song of Achilles. The only part of Song of Achilles that I liked was when they were with their mentor, and that was like 5 seconds of the entire novel.
I liked the part where you compared her butt to a sad face. That was peak literary writing.
Ben brings up a great point. The Ace self-acceptance theme also gets dropped in a way that felt weird to me. Like, it's a big part of the third act breakup, and then it's never brought up again. And it isn't. It's not like the two of them have to, like, have an actual conversation about what would a relationship look like. And again, because the book ends in this specific way, it denies a lot of resolution to the other things.
The thing about it is the two don't add anything. The grief and the asexual representation don't come together at any point to say, like, so what does his asexuality really mean in terms of the themes of the book? Is that a part of his codependence? Does he need to grow past his codependence to accept this part of himself?
Is that one of the obstacles getting in the way of him moving forward? Is understanding that better part of himself to the point where he can accept a relationship with another human being despite it not requiring physical intimacy? There's so much maturation. It's coming of age.
There's so much this book could say, and it doesn't. All it wants to talk about is how pretty Thomas is.
It should be a coming of age story. It should be. It is not. It is absolutely not. There is no moving past anything. There is no processing. There's no, okay, now I can begin to live the rest of my life, or I have to let go these things of my youth. I have to let go the bubble of perfection that was this school while me and my sister were both here. Like, our junior year of high school outside of the ending was such a perfect bubble of my happiness, and I just need to cling to that, but now I can move on past that and I can start looking towards it. There's none of that. You don't get any of it, and it just sucks because you started a book in a boarding school set in high school with young characters with trauma who are avoiding dealing with parts of their life.
I think that's a good summation, in my opinion. I think this deserves... Oh my god, I'm gonna murder Sasha. He will not be quiet right now. It's just because my husband is working in the garage. Anyway, no, I think we need to do a rewrite at some point.
Why? This is such a waste of time. Just write something new.
Oh my god, shush. There are a lot of really good things in this, actually. They're good tools. They weren't used to make something good.
No! There's like the first like chapter or two is good.
I like the idea of a forest impregnating a boy. Like, what a weird concept that the author even just sprinkled upon.
It does
briefly.
nothing.
I'm like, I know, I really thought he was going to take the box cutter and rip open his stomach and rip through the wood, and then she was going to come out like a freaking golem.
That would have been cool.
So I want to highlight a comment from Fern, who is someone that had enjoyed their experience with the book. This book worked for me because I read it in one sitting and was just triggered by my own stuff. So it was a couple feverish hours that drained me. In that sense, it was an emotional ride. I do not remember a ton of things you guys mentioned because I don't think I was even paying attention to it. But looking objectively, I agree with all the criticism. And I think that for some people, having the like if you can just slip into the emotional roller coaster of this story, it will be a much more enjoyable experience. But as someone who was really paying attention to the plot, and like I thought there was a mystery. I thought I was supposed to be paying really close attention and picking all of these things. But if you're sitting there the whole time going, "Oh, when is Andrew going to figure it out?" You're going to be so angry.
If you're expecting a book and a story instead of a masturbatory session, then you are going to be sorely mistaken. Also, Fern says, enjoyed is too strong of a word, Maria.
I feel like Fern and I are feeling the same feeling for, like we're experiencing the same feeling, except for I didn't feel it for this at all, which is interesting, but I felt it a lot for The Spirit Bares Its Teeth. Because I didn't like the ending of that book. You are well aware that, like, I liked the portrayal that the audiobook narrator used for the inner voice that the protagonist had, and I liked the voice, but it was acknowledged as well that if I had to read that physically, that would have been exhausting, and I would not have liked the interruption as often as it was. It would have been more irritating than interesting. I think it was purely almost the theatrics of the narrator and the good acting of the voice person, but, like, there were times that voice in that book really struck home with me. And it's just, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's really interesting because I feel like I am frickin' Andrew in half these situations, or I was when I was younger. And I'm like, nah, man, this is just a little much. Like, this is a little saccharine with your own suffering.
I also want to point out, Ben makes the point, and this is something to acknowledge, or Andrew doesn't overcome his codependence and it ends tragically. Either way, as long as it means something. And that's the thing, is we've talked a lot about how it could have ended not tragically with them moving on, but it also could have just ended tragically in a way that this book, like, doesn't commit to, because the end of this book isn't they didn't overcome their codependence and their inability to process the grief about Dove, and thus things ended tragically. Like, it could have gone that route, but that's not the ending you get. You end and you're like, he buried a notebook and now he's like, are we real? Kiss me and find out, which has a sense of, like,
it's the end of Inception with the little thingy spinning, but there isn't any real evidence to say that it is, because again, his guts are out. They must be dead. He's not going to live. But he didn't cut.
He has.
Yeah, his eye's gone. He has a flower fucking growing out of his eye. Like, he literally eviscerated himself. And it's like, okay, so is Thomas then, is the notebook somehow a metaphor for his, like, it just doesn't, there's no clean cut. There's nothing.
All right, guys, we're going to have to stop here because otherwise we could keep complaining about this forever because this is a bad book. All right. We love you all, our parasocial darlings.
Bye.